Good evening. I'm Constable Akil Mukin, one of the Public and Media Relations Officers for Peel Regional Police. Thank you for joining us for our Tele-Town Hall. Joining us today for this conversation is Chief Nishan Duraiappah, Deputy Chief Mark Andrews, Deputy Chief Anthony O'Doherty, Deputy Chief Nick Milinovich, along with other uniformed and civilian members from Peel Regional Police. We also have Mayor Patrick Brown and Mayor Crombie, as well as the Chair of the Police Services Board, Mr. Ron Chadha, as well as other stakeholders from the Region of Peel Community Safety and Wellbeing Planning section. If during this call you'd like to ask a question, please press *3 and you will be connected with a screener to be placed into the queue. This evening, we will not be able to get to all of your questions due to the limited time available. Your input is, however, very valuable to us, and we would encourage you to provide feedback by emailing communityfeedback@peelpolice.ca. Please note that we do take your input seriously, and we will read every email, but we will not be able to respond to all of them due to the sheer number of emails we expect. We are still aiming to cover as many topics as possible this evening to allow as many of you as possible to be heard and have your questions answered. We ask that you please keep your questions brief and respectful so that we can, in fact, get to as many people as possible. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please push *3 and you will be connected to a screener and they will gather information to ask a question. To start, I'd like to now turn it over to Chief Duraiappah for some opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone, and again, it's Nish Duraiappah, Chief of Police for Peel Regional Police. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to call in, participate. Some of you have pre-registered and sent questions in. I know many of you are just connecting to this call. We first of all need to say that we are embarking on an initiative that needs to be informed by the people we serve. And so the purpose for this evening is to do some listening. We know that the community is, in many cases, are hurting. They're demanding justice, asking for answers, and many are looking to find out what change is going to look like. We here at Peel Regional Police, and one of my commitments since being here, is to be informed by the voices that make up our community, and today is part of that. We intend on doing some meaningful dialogue to answer where it's possible, to hear right from me in full transparency what I can provide to you, but also to be able to take away your input and acknowledge that much of it will form the direction for where our organization goes moving forward. So that being said, we have a limited amount of time, as Akil had mentioned. I apologize personally for not being able to speak to all of you, but this, given the pandemic, is certainly the most accessible way to do that. So that being said, I'd like to turn it back to Akil, and I know we have both our mayors for our fine cities here to also contribute, as well as our board chair for the Police Services Board.
Thank you, Chief. So coming up next, I'd like to call on Mayor Patrick Brown to deliver some opening remarks.
Thank you, Akil and Chief Nishan, for this opportunity. And let me just commend the Peel Police for taking this initiative to listen. When Chief Nish was hired to be the chief of the Peel Police, a lot of people had noted that he was ahead of the curve on technology and equity issues. And I think the fact that you're using modern technology like a Tele-Town Hall to reach out to the community and listen is a great starting point. And I had a friend, Gurdav Gill, who's an elder in Brampton, who told me that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. And if you want to serve the public, listen more than you talk. And I think tonight is an opportunity for us to listen. And like Mayor Crombie, I sit on the Peel Police Services Board, and we know that policing is important. It's an institution that we must have faith in. It's an institution that provides peace of mind to the public. And as we deal with difficult issues, it's important that you, the public, have all the information that the chief has himself. I also take note of the fact that the chief has his senior leadership team there. So it's not just the chief paying us lip service by listening. He's got his entire leadership team here to learn from you, the people that we serve. In the case of police, serve and and protect. A few things that I would highlight at the beginning is I know as a community we've been devastated by street racing. The tragedy just 2 weeks ago when a family was robbed of their future speaks to the fact that we need to be more aggressive on dealing with reckless driving in our community. I should also thank the Peel Police in the case of this dangerous driver for being so swift in making sure that charges were laid for, and frankly sending the message that despicable conduct like this, disregard for human life isn't tolerated. And I know we need to do more, and I think Project Erase, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about that tonight too, but Project Erase I think is helpful in targeting reckless drivers. The second thing I wanted to say is I know that there's a lot of concern right now across Canada and across the world, frankly, with systemic racism and the incidents that happen in the U.S. Left us aghast. But I think it would be naive to think that we don't have our work to do in Canada as well. And I know there are a lot of issues, and whether it's creating more transparency, and I know body cameras, which the Peel Police are now looking at, a motion that Mayor Crombie and myself put forward at the Police Services Board. I think body cameras could help create transparency, accountability, protect the good, expose the bad, and the Chief has been a supporter of that from the beginning. And I also hope we can have a conversation about mental health today. The Peel Police, under the Police Act, have to respond to every mental health call. They have to send an officer. And frankly, there's not enough mental health workers available. Last year, the Peel Police got 15,000 calls. 15,000 calls. And frankly, it's not the best use of their resources, nor I think we're having a conversation now, is it the appropriate use of their resources? So I'm looking forward to making sure that the Chief has your feedback tonight, and I think this is a unique opportunity. You know, I don't know of any other case where a Chief of Police in the country is doing a Tele-Town Hall, and I know this is the first time in Peel Police history, and for me, that's a great starting point. I want to thank Chief Nish for his leadership in very difficult times, and thank you for the opportunity to say a few words at the beginning of this call.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Also on the line this evening, we have Mayor Bonnie Crombie from the City of Mississauga. Mayor Crombie.
Thank you, Keel. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to talk to you. And most importantly, you should know that I'm here to listen to you. We're also here to discuss modernizing and reforming policing. And we're here to discuss how we can build and maintain trust between the community and our police. And we're here to talk about greater accountability and transparency of our police to the public that they serve. Now, I'm very proud to be one of those individuals that recommended Chief Nish Duraiappah. I'm sorry, Chief, I always do it. Duraiappah. He's a progressive leader and someone who's shown his willingness and ability to embrace and bring about change. He's willing to listen and to have tough conversations and to do the hard work necessary to reform policing and ensure that our police service is representative of the people that it serves and treats everyone with fairness and is free from bias and discrimination. Now, we all know that I Can't Breathe has become a rallying cry. What happened to George Floyd was unfortunately not an isolated incident. It has been repeated countless times, and we have experienced loss and tragedy close to home with the death of Dondre Campbell and Ijaz Chowdhury. And we're here tonight because we know that things need to change, and we're committed to doing that. We know that our police officers are good, caring people who got into the profession to serve and for the right reasons. But like all institutions, there are some who are biased and who discriminate. But in a profession that demands public trust and the highest standard of excellence, this can't and won't be tolerated. Systemic racism, discrimination must be identified and called out. Anti-Black racism must be called out because it exists. Black lives matter and they must be protected. So To begin the process of healing and reform requires listening. I recognize my privilege, and I recognize that I have not lived the experience of a Black or a racialized person in our community, and I never will. My job as mayor and as a member of the Police Services Board is to listen, to understand, and to take action where I can. And that starts tonight by listening to you and your suggestions on how we can improve policing in Peel. And that won't be an easy conversation, but I'm hopeful that by working together, we can bring your voice to Peel Police and the Police Services Board, and thus achieve meaningful change and reform. All right, so I will now end and start the listening I've been talking about. Thank you for your participation, for your advocacy, and your willingness to work with us. We look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Crombie. And just one more reminder, if you'd like to ask a question during this town hall, please push *3 on your telephone keypad, and you'll be placed into queue to speak with a screener. And to start our evening, I'm going to once again turn it over to Chief Duraiappah.
Thank you, Akil. So, good evening, everyone. Once again, I think before we start, and we thank the thousands of people that are dialed into this town hall. Again, the reason we're doing this is because we've got ideas, and I've got a plan as a chief that has been here for about 8 months on a way forward for Peel Regional Police Service, and we're prepared to commit to that. But we also want to be sensitive to things that have occurred in recency, and also to provide opportunity for real dialogue or engagement. And as I said, I think as the chief for an organization that polices 1.4 million people, it's incumbent upon me to be sensitive and always reflect on our programs and services need to meet the needs of the people we police. So before I begin and maybe highlight a couple of these themes so that we can get to phone calls, I think it would be appropriate for you all to hear from me as it pertains to some of the more recent nuances that we are experiencing. And the first, you've heard both mayors speak to it, is the killing of George Floyd on May 25th. Not only brought forward long-held angst and anger that has been part of the experience of Black people in North America. It's unfortunate these tragedies are ruling the news cycle, but the conversation on how to address and eliminate anti-Black racism is rightfully in the forefront, and that is why we're speaking today. So, I need to acknowledge that not only in Canada and Ontario and right here in Peel Region, we've had our own personal experiences that have caused great suffering. I know the mayors have spoken to both of them. But as an organization and as your chief, I am committed, and so are the rest of our team, and I've got my leadership team here that are going to be open to any of the conversation, that we need to do our part to stop racial bias and mitigate impact on those who we serve and who serve with us. And I need to acknowledge the mayor's comments is that we have 3,100 members of this organization that took on their employment here for the heart of serving our community. And I do need to recognize that however we have this, we also have a history in policing and across Canada and our region that is marked and dotted with words and actions that are tainted by racial bias. But I first want to reiterate that the commitment from me is to you is that this is an important discussion, and we do want to inform our actions and our next steps to strengthen our relationship with the Black community. We also know that we need to strengthen our relationship with our racialized communities and our Indigenous community. Peel Region is your community, and your voice is what we need to continue this way. So to not also acknowledge that and not be dismissive, I know and I've heard the concerns raised by our residents on the death of DeAndre Campbell and Ijaz Chowdhury right here in Peel Region. The families and the communities need to know what happened. We know that they want answers, they want accountability, they want justice, and we know the community wants it now. So my role and my promise to maintain transparency is part of the discussion tonight. Peel Police and many other police agencies across the province are advocating for change, and the current iteration of the processes are set out by legislation, which in this case, unfortunately prevents me from speaking about the incidents until the Independent Civilian Agency, the SIU, completes the investigation. So I just need to reiterate that I, along with chiefs, understand that the space on gap of information, it causes concern for the public and families. It allows for the space to be filled by other contexts. I have myself been advocating for a quicker completion of SIU investigations. I'm hopeful that we will see them be prioritized. I've also advocated, along with other chiefs in Ontario, that the communication piece, where it's in the public and community interest, be filled. And not to speak too much on these, I want to open it up for questions that really draw out these elements. I do want to speak to mental health. As the mayor mentioned, we are in the thousands of responses to mental health related calls. And this year alone, we're close to 3,000 mental health apprehensions, and I need to just provide a context to the mayor's comments. Right now, in the province of Ontario, the only way 24/7 for somebody in crisis to be connected with a clinician, the lawful authority to do that is in the Mental Health Act, which legislates police only. And I think all of us would agree, inclusive of my team that's here, is right there, inherent in the legislation itself, is where we can see the systems are misaligned. And we are the 24/7 go-to in policing for thousands of calls to connect people to hospitals. Every day we average about 18 to 20 mental health calls and apprehensions a day. And it's not us, and I would be the first, and I've said it in the recent weeks to media outlets, CBC, Global News, locally, and in my print, is that the ability for other systems that are more appropriate to respond to mental health calls and crisis needs to occur. We know we are the 24/7, but we are not addiction specialists, youth professionals, mental health. We can't solve housing and homelessness. But in the current model, we are, unfortunately, the 24/7 go-to. In the interim, we've been working along with other police agencies right across Ontario to create partnerships like we do here with Peel Dufferin CMHA to have a COAST program, a mobile crisis response program, which is actually crisis workers doubled up with police officers that we can respond to. But I have to say, we don't have enough. We have enough during the day and in the afternoon, but they're not able to respond to all of them. We do ensure that every individual, civilian and sworn, has an element of crisis response training. But as you can imagine, that is a stopgap while we, as a policing institution, are responding to emergency management and crisis response. We as police officers have a role legislated to preserve the peace, protect victims, prevent crime, and respond to emergencies, along with paramedics and firefighters. But we do recognize that we are not the best and most appropriately equipped individuals to respond to them. And being on the doorsteps of Mr. Chowdhury or Mr. Campbell and the tragic outcomes are not what we wish for either. I'd like to briefly just mention that we all agree, we've all seen the movement and discussion on defunding police, and it is one that's not just in our local area, but North America wide. And if we stop and think about the principle of what people are saying is, other systems should be stood up and more appropriately resourced in order to really impact the crisis outcomes that we're experiencing on the front line. I guess my comment to everyone is that I agree 100%. There is not a chief that would agree that it's actually, the voices and movements that we hear that are focused on police are actually talking about, honestly, a change, a redesign to human services, period, where the police are not the ones responding to crisis, but that upstream activities and thoughtful ones are done. The discussion on should one tap be turned off and another one be turned on simultaneously needs thoughtful consideration. And I'm an advocate for, am I talking my way out of a job? I think most chiefs would want to be free and absent from crime and social disorder. And if there are other alternatives for it, we are proponents of those solutions. And again, we do not think that an immediate response to defunding us is going to achieve the other systems being bolstered right away. So this is where I transition, and we also want your feedback. Myself, in the last 8 months here, have made some significant observations that Peel Regional Police, being the third largest municipal police agency in Canada, has the second and third largest cities in Ontario right in one region, requires a real progressive forward movement, a change from traditional law enforcement to focus on public health, ensuring that the health and wellness of families and individuals is a priority. And so we are committing to doing that. And some of the, at a very high level, areas that we are going to be embarking on, and also it's just the beginning of countless consultations that we are going to be engaging in. We've done several in a smaller context in the last several weeks. We're going to continue in a variety of formats doing that. If the Teletown Hall works, based on your feedback, we will consider doing another one in the near future. But one of the things I've told my people is if we're not good on the inside, we're not good on the outside. We're embarking on a significant equity, diversity, inclusion plan, which is going to ensure that we have authentic systemic change within the organization. And part of that is making sure that our members are built in terms of training capacity and the messaging within, so that when they intersect with the public, they're also doing their best in that regard. And in that is really an emphasis on a human rights focused centric approach, which we're in partnership with the Ontario Human Rights Commission to discuss a voluntary initiative. We hope to bring some finality to that project, and that begins with the acknowledgement that systemic racism does exist in a variety of different systems, but that we have a role to take on accountability, monitoring, build resiliency in a multi-year plan, and make sure that we're fully engaged along that way. The other piece, as Amir Brown mentioned, is a real commitment to innovation and technology. And that's not just about spending tax dollars to get things that are shiny and new. It's looking at an opportunity to develop infrastructure as a platform and a gateway for us to provide better services to the community. We are not in the traditional policing model from 30 years ago, and policing needs to change. It is not only just one that is more complex, but it needs to allow the public to access services and connection to services through a variety of different mechanisms in a collaborative way, and we are just one mechanism to doing that. And finally, the most important one is I am about to launch a remodernization of our approach to community policing, and that is entrenched in a model called the Community Safety Wellbeing Framework. I have Mr. Brian Laundrie, who's the lead from the Region of Peel here. We've got other systems leaders within the room, and the framework simply says is that the constant and historic approach of policing just from the emergency or incident response model, and we know it, we've seen it in recent weeks, is not sustainable. It doesn't meet the needs of the Republic. We have to find ways to get upstream to change outcomes, and that comes from a commitment to finding ways to mitigate risk, to prevent risk in the community, and also to find partnerships to enhance social development. It is a difficult concept to do on the phone and explain, but these are principles that we are going to do. It needs to happen because we know it's a better mechanism of doing things. And during this process, we're going to work collaboratively with all our key stakeholders in the Region of Peel to make sure that the systems levels, right down to the grassroots front line, are operating in a way where we get the right services to the right people at the right time. And in most cases, and hopefully all cases that we see where we're not the most appropriate agency, you will see us find an alternative. And so with that, I just want to say, again, thank you so much for your time. I want to reaffirm that the way forward has to be community-centric with an emphasis on collaboration. We're going to use this blueprint and a roadmap to move forward but we're not going to do that until we answer questions, listen openly, and take your feedback and comments. So with that, Akil, I'll turn that back to you.
Thank you, Chief. So this brings us to our question and answer period for the evening. Again, if you are just joining us, if you'd like to ask a question during this call, please push *3. During this telephone town hall, you'll be connected with an operator who will gather your information and put you into the queue to ask your question. So to start off our question this evening, the first person we have is Harbhajan. Harbhajan, if you're on the line, go ahead with the question.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. This is a great initiative from our police chief, Nishan Duraiappah, and both Mayor Patrick Brown and Bonnie Crombie. So once again, I really appreciate that you guys doing more than enough reaching out to the people, how to make them comfortable. This is the first time I'm hearing the chief saying all these promising words, which is I have no doubt that he's going to do what he said he's going to do. But you guys are busy. There's 3,000 already. You have a call, then 18 to 20 mental health calls a day. But my question remains the same for the last 15 years. When is the police going to have enough staff, trained staff, to deal with the mental health issues? I sit on the board, Schizophrenia Board of Ontario, and also I am an institutional alternative of a mental health. I don't think the policemen had any intention to kill anybody. But they don't know. They are not trained to deal with these kind of to deal with the mental. So my question is to Chief, that when are you going to get really serious to train more and have more units available? And even if you want some civilian on a voluntary basis, I am ready. I'm just saying that we need more people out there to help police to understand how to deal with the mental when individuals who have a mental issues. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak.
Thank you, Harbhajan, for the question. And you highlight an important aspect that we, despite the fact that we're not the most appropriate resource to respond and bring resolution to mental health, illness, or crisis in the community, we are the 24/7 go-to. And so we're the first to acknowledge that we do need to have capacity to make sure that we do our best on the front line. So I think at a baseline very quickly is that every police officer here at Peel Regional Police receives elements of crisis intervention training, and that's built into our legislative training that we do annually. And there are officers and individuals that have a greater amount of training depending on what their unit or where they're assigned to. And so that's part of a component that we don't self-develop. We partner with, as I said, CMHA, Peel Dufferin, SHIP, which is a Services of Housing and Peel Children's Center, our justice partners, to make sure that we have that. The problem being is, as you know, we got hired, most officers here got hired because they had the skills and ability to be the best equipped in certain areas, but not because they're mental health professionals. That is not our role. And the tools and equipment and the paradigm they've been asked to do is sort of everything for everyone. What's happened in the last several years is that we've incrementally added different programming. One that's been here for a while is called COAST, Crisis Outreach Support Team. It is several of my officers are seconded to Peel Dufferin CMHA. They're in a plainclothes capacity, and what they do is they go out to non-crisis calls to provide support for families. Maybe they follow up on an incident if officers were at a dispute and they perhaps saw a hoarding issue or one where the parents required support. They'll go in a non-crisis moment. What happened this year, and I think what you're highlighting is happening in other organizations, is in Peel we've just started in January is a mobile crisis response team, which I referred to earlier. That is one which was dependent on a funding stream that came through the health stream to CMHA, which allowed them to, hire, train, and allocate crisis workers and mental health professionals available to ride along with us. One of the things that we're feeling is a pressure, and we're advocating the province to support us, is that there is no funding stream for me to resource officers in this regard. So I have to take them from the frontline assignments, which is it's worth it in every step of the way. But at this point, we don't have although we're available 7 days a week, it's not 24/7. And for a population of 1.5 million, we don't have enough units. We have 2 units during the day shift, two units during the afternoon, which, as you can imagine, if you're tied up at a hospital with somebody who needs to be admitted, there are many other calls. I told you there are about 16 to 20 of them happening a day. One of the things we are endeavoring on doing is bolstering our training. We've undertaken, the crisis intervention officers have enhanced training. But we also know that studies have shown that empathy-based training is critical when it comes to mental health, responding to mental health. And that means the responding officer having some empathy and understanding that the person who's in illness, for example, your question is schizophrenic, might not be responding to their directions and interactions the way they want. So we're undertaking that as part of our annual training. We also have, all our civilian members, from the time you pick up a phone to the time you meet an investigator, have elements of it. But, I'll be the first to say, it still will never equate to us being the equivalent of a crisis worker ourselves. Again, these are temporary fixes. We are working with the province and other policing institutions to enhance their training. But, again, we aren't the professionals in that regard. So this is one of the things we're calling on advocacy for and alternatives for our response.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Harbhajan. So the next question we have is from Mark. Mark, go ahead. Your line's open.
Thank you for taking my call. There's a lot of conversation currently on social media and in the news about the role of officers in high schools. As someone with not much first-hand knowledge of what the purpose of officers in the high schools are, can you provide the benefits from your perspective?
Thank you, Mark. And to answer that question, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Mark Andrews.
Thank you, Mark. Great question. First off, I want to acknowledge that the intent of the school resource officer program has always been to support and engage youth in our community, and in particular in our school community. We've heard loud and clear that a segment of our community does not feel that the program in its current iteration is achieving that goal. So we are committed to a review of the existing SRO program, a review that's rooted in commitment to equity and inclusion, with a goal to ensure that we have an appropriate made and feel program for our community. We'll engage in a system-wide review of the program with a goal towards a focus on positive engagement with our youth in our schools, so we can create a way and a means for our youth to thrive in the school and in the community. We'll do that using a collaborative approach with our stakeholders, parents, and anti-racism and anti-oppression experts, as well as the school board. We recognize that there's an urgency right now, and we're working with our key stakeholders to develop a framework as well as possible timelines to accomplish the work. It is critical that we engage with our youth if we want to have the upstream impact that is the focus of the community safety and well-being planning framework. I know that the Chief referenced this in his opening remarks, and it's a little hard to sort of give you the full flavor in a telephone conversation, but understand that the primary goal of school resource officers is to engage our youth in a positive setting and to help them succeed. We want them to be productive, contributing members of the community, and to have a positive relationship with their police service.
Mark, and just before you finish that I appreciate the response from Mark, the deputy, and the question from Mark. And just to top it up, on a personal level, I agree. If the model is a traditional law enforcement model of like the mall cop or a hallway monitor, absolutely it has a horrible impact on people. It's a negative impact. And where those models exist, they need to be refocused. And what Deputy Andrews spoke to is that we're moving and we're evolving our service delivery to make sure that it's focused on the health and welfare of families and young people. And to be able to lose, for example, in the public school system, I'll openly say it, is contact with over 150 and 160,000 young people in a positive way, especially if we could focus on, mitigating risk and positive engagement. We're going to lose an opportunity to build the future of our community. And, us leaving that role or point of contact would just put us into a law enforcement function only, which I think we'd all agree is counterintuitive to what's needed right about this time. We know that there's a lot of mistrust and hurt that people have. We know that there is a disproportionately negative impact on racialized communities. It's been proven in certain systems and it has been in certainly some education systems. But here is an opportunity for us to change that narrative. It's time to actually press into this. And I can say as a chief, we can egress out of a lot of things like mental health calls response. One of the most devastating things could probably be our young people. And if I know that it's debatable, but that'll be one point that I will continue to advocate for. Clearly, we're working with our school boards and private institutions to make sure that we end up ready for the next school session in the best manner possible. And I've got a full team here that's going to make sure that I can achieve that. Thank you, Akil.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Mark and Deputy Andrews. So the next question comes from Brennan. Brennan, go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, my name is Brennan. Hi, my name is Brennan. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Brennan, are you still there? I think we lost Brennan there. So the next question, we're going to go to Romaine. Romaine, go ahead. Your line is open.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, worship your mayors and police chief. So I have a three-part question. First is tackling systematic racism in the police force. In terms of changing the police culture of we protect our own, right? What are the steps are rather being taken to ensure that police who step outside of their jurisdiction or outside of the bounds of their duty is being held accountable? So that's part one. Part two is I know that the Peel region currently has the anti-racism committee. So how is those recommendations that are being made by this committee being used currently in terms of community policing through the Peel region police? And three is the chief mentioned that defunding the police might not be the best at the moment because there are no other mechanisms to pick up for that shortfall. So in terms of then, while we wait for those mechanisms to go in place by our councils, Mayor Brown, Mayor Crombie, and all the other mayors in Peel, in terms of training times for the police, for each officer, will we see an increase in terms of really zoning in on crisis management when they are faced, because they are the ones really running into these situations, right? So in terms of increasing those training times for those officers. And just something else here in terms of what's a figure, that ballpark figure in terms of really being effective at doing what the police is supposed to do. What is that figure that will cost taxpayers, us, and also be beneficial to you? Because we've heard each time we ask for greater level of policing in terms of being better at doing what you're supposed to do, it's always the mention of, we need funding for it. So give us that ballpark figure in terms of what would get us there so we can work towards it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Chief Duraiappah.
Okay, thank you for the, I think it was a 5-part question actually, buddy, but no problem. I've written some scratch notes there to prompt me to get through that. So the first thing is, what are the mechanisms in place for officers when they step outside of their lawful authority? So again, just to reframe this, is everything an officer is able to do is embodied in legislation. That's a combination of federal and provincial legislation. The dominant one for us in Ontario is the Ontario Police Services Act, which is being evolved as we speak, and then also the federal legislation, both of which have sections in it that hold officers accountable to misconduct when they are acting outside of their lawful duties. And the way that can, as serious as a criminal offense, clearly they're equally liable to be investigated for criminal offense if should occur. Let me first say, we've been given a lot of authorities for the preservation of peace and safety and community well-being, and so it should be that there's a lot of accountability placed on us. We are probably in Ontario and Canada, in our profession, one of the most legislated and heavily built-in oversight in most professions. That being said, what happens when it steps outside of it, there are mechanisms for misconduct, which include being charged under the Police Services Act, charged by independent bodies such as the SIU should there be a matter which is criminal in nature where there's serious bodily harm or death. And, so I think, Deputy Eduardi, maybe you've had an oversight out of a professional standards. I can get you to unpack that a little bit, and then we can speak to what we can do for anti-racism, the training, and the funding component.
Okay, so specifically, Chief, what did you want me to look at?
So in circumstances, what processes are in place that we can articulate for the callers that are outside the duty when we step outside our lawful authorities, and what's the accountability piece?
Okay, thank you, Chief, and thank you for the question. Having served in that area, there are many accountability mechanisms that police officers, both on and off duty, are to account for in their both professional acts and sometimes even in their personal lives, which call into question when they enact any of their police duties. One of them is a civilian oversight agency that looks into police misconduct that is not of a criminal nature, and that is the Office of the Independent Police Review Director. And that independent agency looks into misconduct that is alleged by the community or even within the police service. And generally what occurs there is the misconduct is referred to the agency, investigated, and then reported back directly to the community member. A second area of oversight is the Special Investigations Unit, which looks into conduct of an officer that is generally criminal in nature, in which where serious bodily harm or death occurs, and we've seen that recently here, and also when there's allegations of serious misconduct of criminal nature, such as sexual assault as specifically defined by the Special Investigations Unit. That independent agency conducts a criminal investigation outside and independent of any police jurisdiction, and then reports back directly to the community and to the police chief with results. And last, the chief of police of the presiding jurisdiction also has the ability and the authority to undertake investigations really of minor misconduct to police officers, which would range anything from minor abuse of language or civil unrest to where the chief would assign a conduct investigation to a member of the service and report back to the chief with recommendation of discipline. So those are generally the three streams of accountability that police officers in our jurisdiction face.
Thanks, Anthony. And I know we've got lots of callers, so I know there's a 3 or 4 part question. There's a part of it was pertaining to what capacity do we have to redress anti-racism or bias-free policing training. So I think we all have to acknowledge that implicit bias, racial bias exists innately in people. It's preceded all of us being here at this table. And what we need to do in policing is find mechanisms to ensure that we unpack that. So those elements of training are university standard right across the province. We know that there are best practices already being applied in other countries, and we continue to utilize those as building blocks to our foundational training. But can I tell you, the historic response to anti-racism training has been always leaders saying, "Oh, we'll resolve it through training." And if you speak to human rights specialists, they'll say there are other mechanisms that need to be in place. So what we're going to do in the next year or two to come is commence a real overhaul of our processes that includes right from our engagement ability to be informed in what we're doing, to overhauling our policy structure and guidance, inclusive of looking at mechanisms for monitoring and accountability, which will include data collection so that we can look at disproportionate activity with certain populations that, given our region, the diversity, we know it's going to innately be that way, but we need to look and have opportunities to report that publicly, and also our organizational change plan. The final piece as it relates to funding, it probably will come up again, is that 94% of my police budget goes to salary and benefits. It is often seen in the public as looking as very, busting at the seams, but there's a small margin for me to utilize dollars annually to do new initiatives. So when it comes down to, increasing crisis response teams, we really need to find other solutions. And it's not always from a police standpoint, it's from other sectors, which is what we're trying to do is say the solution is not always resourcing us. Yes, we do have a growing population. Yes, we do have probably the second highest gun and gang violence, intimate partner homicides, human trafficking in this province, right in our region, and they require real, investigative and criminal efforts that happen day and night. But we don't need to be the panacea and invest in other areas. And I do need to clarify, our funding doesn't come, although the 2 mayors are here, they're here because they're representing their populations and the people that, support them in office. The funding doesn't come from them. The way the model works for policing is that the Police Services Act legislates the Police Services Board to establish a budget. The budget belongs to the board, and the board, goes to the municipality, and the municipality's role is to, find the funding to support that budget, which we know is a difficult one because it is the taxpayers in the end. We know that despite the pandemic, municipalities are feeling significant pressure, and so the trickle back is we are required to be efficient and effective as well, and that is, for my command team, is the foremost of our activities. So hopefully we, skim through some of those discussions. And Akil, do you want to move to the next one?
Thank you so much, Chief. Just before we get to our next caller, we're going to do our first poll question of the evening. So we want to give everyone that's on the line the opportunity to participate and to engage with us. So the first poll question of the evening is, do you believe that body-worn cameras as an additional tool will be effective in the provision of policing services and as an additional accountability mechanism? So I'll read that one more time. Do you believe that body-worn cameras as an additional tool will be effective in the provision of policing services and as an additional accountability mechanism? So on your keypad, you can push 1 for yes, 2 for no, or 3 for unsure. Again, that's 1 for yes, 2 for no, and 3 for unsure. Our next question today comes from Trayvon. Trayvon, go ahead. Your line's open.
Hi guys, how you doing? My question is actually about body cameras, and I just want to know if this occurs and a member of the public is concerned about their privacy and does not wish for their interaction to be captured on camera, will they be able to ask an officer to turn off the camera?
Thanks for the question, Trayvon. I'm going to turn this one over to Deputy O'Doherty to answer.
Okay, thanks very much, and that's an excellent question, anticipating that there would be some questions tonight about body-worn camera. And although recent global and local events have advanced the dialogue about body-worn cameras, it has been in the Peel Regional Police technical roadmap for quite some time. And in fact, it'd be remiss for me not to mention that the real advantage of the body-worn camera is the back end, which is a digital evidence mobile strategy, which allows police to enable other crucial technological advancements to make sure that we can provide community safety and well-being. Now, specifically relating to body-worn cameras, we must acknowledge that they cannot be solely relied upon for improving relationships and service with our communities. So that's earned through human-centric interactions, not just through video recordings. But it is a tool to provide consistent and transparent, meaningful services. So to answer your question specifically then about privacy and if a body-worn camera can be turned off, I first want to address this. A body-worn camera, when implemented, especially here in TRP, Peel Regional Police, will have strict policy and guidelines about when the camera is to be turned on and when it is to be turned off. In emergency situations, most likely the camera will never be turned off. The purpose of it is to capture evidence and also to ensure accountability and interaction. In terms of when the response to a non-emergency, then certainly upon request of a citizen and considering all the factors occurring at that time, a body-worn camera may be turned off to protect the privacy of our citizens. And not only that, but there's other situations that will dictate when the camera should not be on, including, at times, the videoing of children and or survivors of abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, who do not want to be identified. In those cases, it would be appropriate. So many things to unpack in terms of when the camera is on and off. What I should mention also is that in terms of having the camera on, according to strict guidelines and policies, there will also be training, audits, and supervision. And in some cases, artificial intelligence and automated process may trigger the camera to come on. For instance, when a taser is deployed, there may be automation for the camera to come on. So I hope that answers your question. The subject of body-worn cameras is a hot button topic item right now for sure, and I can be reached at anthony.o'doherty@peelpolice.ca to answer any more of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy, for your answer, and thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Golem. Golem, your line is open. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. My name is Ghulam Ahmed Khan, and I want to thank you, the Mayor, Mayor Bonnie Crombie, and the Chief of Police of Peel. I was actually there at the protest at the Peel Regional Police headquarters this last weekend, and I just wanted to I moved to Canada in Mississauga actually in 2001, and Mississauga has been my home. And now anyone asks me after about 20 years in Canada, where are you from? I'd say I'm from Mississauga, but I live in London now. I'm actually taking this call from in front of the church while taking a bike ride. But my point here is that my sentiment is that when I was standing there at the protest, I saw. What struck me was the youth, the frustration in the youth as they stood there and talked about their being shot. And to me, that was very worrisome in the sense that I have a 3-year-old who'll be going to school soon, and my sentiment there was working is that those people who are not realizing that in the end of the day we only wear 2 colors, and that's red and white. these people will be left behind in this country. People who don't realize that we all have just two colors, which is red and white. And we wear that proudly, and we will, and we will thank God for thee, as we say, and sing. But anyway, my question, I don't know if you guys can hear me because I can't hear any sound, but if the SIU, given the track record of the SIU so far, what is your sentiment on that note? You have full 100% confidence, given the track record, including Sami Atik and these other people that died just all over this press call. And, I just want to ask, what's your sentiment on SIU? I mean, you have full confidence that it doesn't need any overhaul or a rethink of how they're conducting business, because I think what's lacking in the police force right now is discipline and accountability.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn that over to Chief Duraiappah to start off.
Well, thank you for the question. So, first things first, as I said earlier, as a police organization, we believe the need for independent oversight and the mechanism that has been here for many years and has seen several evolutions is what we now have as the Special Investigations Unit, which has a separate authority. Just the sole purpose is to keep oversight over us. And as a chief, I support that 100%. Do I believe that there are opportunities for that process to improve? Yes, also 100%. In recent years, we've had many judicial and provincial reviews and recommendations come forward on how to improve some of the outcomes that the SIU undertakes. And two of the big things are the expediency, that means how fast their investigations conclude, and the second piece is the communication. You heard me say that to both. There also recently was Justice Honorable Michael Tulloch conducted his review of the police interactions, specifically with our Black community, and as most of you would recall, is based around street check. But a significant piece that he focused on was on the accountability and what can be done to enhance people's confidence in systems that exist. And with that were several recommendations to provide greater support and assets for the SIU so that they can, regardless of the outcome of their investigations, both the community and the police agency, everybody involved would like to see them resolved in a thorough but prompt manner. And, we're advocates for those recommendations coming through. And we're hoping that some of it will be embodied in the end of this year with the new revision of the Police Services Act. There's a specific component regarding the SIU. I've issued a letter to Director Martino of the SIU within recent weeks, had several conversations because, as you know, Peel Region is the forefront for that. So that's front and center, and on behalf of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, we've also undertaken the same advocacy to make sure that we can work with them to ensure that they get what they need done in a prompt manner. But, as an immigrant myself, Golan, and as an individual wearing a uniform, one that's, on a personal level experienced racism and seen it with my own eyes, and understand how it can weave its way into different systems. The question of what can we do to bolster people's confidence in us and relations with the community is not one which we can do on the back of our heels, but requires a lot of activity. And I'm going to just open it up to Deputy Chief Nick Milinovich. He is, has contributed significantly to legislation that's been developed for the province around community safety and well-being. And we'll, be able to quickly touch on that. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Just to complement some of the conversation that Chief was having surrounding how do we as a police organization really begin to build relationships with our communities, our diverse communities, and specifically our youth. And it is a great question. It's something that absolutely we need to invest in. And for me, the answer is very simple. It really begins with not only providing an opportunity to collaborate with police, we need to move away in policing from the idea that we have proprietary ownership of the service we're delivering, and really invite the community in to help build those systems that we're hoping or that we expect the community to consume. They need to help us develop those programs and do it in a way that's tailored to their needs. And this kind of ties into the second part of how I really believe we should be going about building those relationships, and it starts by creating trust. From a community safety and well-being perspective, I can tell you that everything that we're working on and working towards, yes, it has the planning principles, but in addition to that, it's with an eye towards the type of diversity that is in our community and building programs that not only relate to, but those communities have had an opportunity to provide input into, and also help to participate in delivering. So, in summary, I think those are some pretty critical concepts in how we could move those relationships forward. And what I would do is, I'm just going to pass it over to Deputy Andrews here, who has some additional comments to add to that.
Well, I don't have a lot to add to that, Nick, but I do want to say that the opportunity for positive engagement benefits not only our community, but it benefits our officers. The chief likes to say that if you're not good on the inside, you can't be good on the outside. And positive interaction between our police officers, in particular our youth, is good for us as an organization. It means, our officers who deal with horrendous tragedies day in and day out, the opportunity to engage with young people in positive settings in an incredibly diverse community, an incredibly dynamic community, is a positive for our members. And I know that's not the forefront of what we're discussing here, but as a member of the executive and with all the executives here, we value that, and we value the positive interaction with our community.
Thank you, Deputy. Before we get to our next question, I'll just go over the results from our poll. So the question was, do we believe that body-worn cameras will be, as an additional tool, will be effective? 79% of respondents said yes, 10% said no, and 11% were unsure. Thank you all for your participation there. And our next question is from Ivan. Ivan, go ahead. Your line is open.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Okay. As a community leader, I wanted to point out that I was disappointed hearing about how the police handle the mental health situation, not one time but two times, one after the other. But I also want to point out all the good work that I've been seeing from Field Region in the past, especially the last year. And I really wanted to thank the police force for that. Before we're talking about defunding the police, I hear there is people suggesting that. I would like to know what is the stats and what are the data that recommends the number of police officers per city, per capital. Do you have a number that you can share with us? And comparing it to what we actually have in Brampton, like are we behind the recommendation or we are below the recommendation?
Thanks for your question. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Duraiappah to answer that one.
Thank you, Yvonne. And I'm apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but I think first things first is the outcome of the tragedy in our, as you mentioned, our mental health response. We are saddened by the outcome too, and despite all the good that we do, we also grieve when nobody here took on their job and their oath to see the outcome of a loss of life. So I'd like to just first acknowledge that piece. But then, your second part, as it relates to our resourcing and are we adequately resourced, I think the one thing, there's a variety of different metrics that are used to sort of gauge how police service is appropriately resourced. Some of them are, crime statistics and our ability to, resolve crime, crime severity index, and solvency rates, which, are all important indicators, but none of them are on its own the answer. But when you ask about, basically your question is, how many police officers are we adequately resourced per capita? The universal rule of measure is by 100,000 population, and that is Stats Canada. If you Google, it's called COP to POP, police to population. You can get the most recent data and statistics off the Statistics Canada website, and they did recently come up with an updated version. I'm not sure if they're updated there on the website, but generally speaking, the national average, and our board chair, Mr. Chada, often refers to this, is about 180 officers per 100,000. That's the national average. So, for example, if you go to Montreal, it's 225 officers per 100,000, or you go to Edmonton or Vancouver, it's 180, 190. So the national average is 180. Here in Ontario, I believe out of the 48 police services, the average is roughly around the 160 plus mark. Here in Peel Region, our average number of police officers are 142. I'm looking at my team. 142 per 100,000. So every 100,000 population out of our nearly 1.5 million is 142 officers. So it is one of the lowest ratios of officers per population. And again, I'm not advocating to meet the provincial average, because let's be honest, as a police leader, it's how our officers use their time, what they do, what our approach is, to be smarter. It's not about a tough on crime or softer on crime. It's smarter on community safety is what we're advocating. So, but that being said, we know we have one of the fastest growing, or the fastest growing regional municipality outside of a small pockets everywhere in Ontario, here in Ontario, if not Canada. We know that 80% roughly of them are racialized population. Close to 60% of them would identify as immigrants. We've got Pearson International Airport, a lot of confluence of factors, and probably, the highest number of homicides and gun violence that we've seen in years. Last year we had about 700 firearms rounds discharged that we've investigated. And that doesn't mean it's everything. And that's almost a 30 or 40% increase from the year before. So are there real pressures? Do we need more? Absolutely. So, and when I mentioned earlier that 90 or 94% of my budget is salaries in dollars, it would immediately defunding us. And you saw the City of Toronto, somebody discussed a motion to reduce the budget by 10%. Just for your reference, 10% here in the region of Peel equates to about 297 officers plus 100 civilians. So you can do a combination of it. So probably over 350 to 400 officers. And if I can just spend a little time here, because I know the defunding question is that really we have evolved our ability to hire some of the best and most brightest people with great EI skills, diversity. We had I think a 50% racialized class in our last recruit class. We've got over 1,500 of our members are multilingual. So that's a third of our workforce is multilingual. If I were to get rid of 300, 400 officers, that would be probably the last 3 or 4 years worth of hiring gone. And to be frank, we've hired the best that we can, but we continue to hire people that are equipped for the future. And really what we're doing is counterintuitive, and we'd be losing some of the best and brightest that will be policing this community here in 30 years. So, so we continue to make sure the Police Services Board is committed to providing adequate and efficient policing services. We are good stewards of the resources we have, but again, immediately turning the tap off or reducing our funding would have some significant impact on some of the real urban pressures. And, there'll be a time where hopefully other systems, should they be effectively stood up, can help us egress out of some of these pressures. So thanks again for the question, Yvonne.
Thank you so much. Just before we get to our next question, we're actually going to move on to our second poll question for the evening, and it reads as follows. As it relates to youth interactions with police, should the role of the police be geared towards proactive or reactive activities with youth? Once again, as it relates to youth interactions with police, should the role of the police be geared towards proactive or reactive activities with youth? Press 1 for proactive, 2 for reactive, and 3 for unsure. Again, that's 1 for proactive, 2 for reactive, and 3 for unsure. Our next question is from Lomi. Lomi, go ahead. Your line is open.
Oh, hello. I don't mean to sound negative or anything like that. In fact, 50 years ago, I'm pretty sure the field police saved my life, but that's another story. I currently live with someone who has a mental disability, and to me, I understand what the police is trying to doing, but what I don't understand is why you sound so positive when sometimes even doctors aren't sure how to deal with someone with a mental disability. And so if you say you're going to, whatever you're going to do, how is that going to help someone when the medical profession aren't going or aren't able to help someone with a mental disability? What I have found in my personal case is sometimes is the police seem to be eager to help someone if attend to a situation if they think someone is, for example, drunk, and they take them to jail, get them sober, and send them back. But again, if the medical profession isn't able to help or figure out or cannot figure out how to help someone who has a mental disability, why does the police think that they can make a difference? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound negative, but it sounds a bit frustrating to me because it sounds very promising, but I don't feel it is. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your question. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Duraiappah.
Thank you, Akil. And Lomi, thank you for the question. And I'm actually going to give it to Deputy Nick to answer. But I just want to acknowledge your first statement is the reason we're doing this phone call is for us to hear how, the reality of what you are experiencing and members are experiencing. So you don't have to apologize. We were the first to admit, and you heard me say it, that if we're not big enough to understand where there's opportunities to improve and be flexible and, to get better so that we can do better for you, then we shouldn't be doing our jobs right now. So let me turn it over to Nick for a response to your question. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Chief. Just to add to that, what I would say is you are absolutely right. As police officers, we aren't the professionals that have all the answers or that will be able to diagnose people. We recognize that. The good news is we've recognized that, and we've started working towards improvements and participating in different initiatives that really are intended to not only incorporate that into our service delivery model, but also help redirect people to the places where they can get help. Currently, we are, as we mentioned earlier, working on a community safety and well-being plan, which has a number of service providers that are participating in that plan and helping us reform not only our own service delivery model, but the service that's being provided in the community. And I think another thing that's also important, which, when I listen to you describe your situation reminds me of the importance, is we need to make sure that we include people with lived experience in those discussions. And that is something that our police service is doing. Your perspective that you just provided us there is incredibly valuable. And it's one that needs to be represented. We are doing or ensuring those types of representations are occurring at a number of different initiatives that are being steered by police and other service providers. Things like a mental health action table, which is currently in a consultation phase. We are looking at other ways to mitigate risk for people that are struggling with mental health related crisis and issues like situation tables. And we've really, there's been a concerted effort amongst the police to begin engaging professionals, people with lived experience, advocates, really in helping build a better service model for our community, not just be delivered by police, but to be delivered by our community for our community. And again, I'll just revert back to the first, one of the first statements that Chief made. It really is our intent is to make sure that we get the right people at the right time to our community, and that's the approach that we've been taking.
Thank you, Deputy. Again, just before we get to our next question, I'll just go with the poll results. A question was, as it relates to youth interactions with police, should the role of the police be geared towards proactive or reactive activities with youth? 73% said it should be proactive, 7% said reactive, and 20% were unsure. Our next question comes from Len. Len, go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, good evening. I first want to start off by thanking the chief and mayors who are online for this call. I think it's a great initiative to be able to speak with our community. Now, my question goes a little bit back to something that was mentioned earlier as it relates to the SIU and the outcomes. One of the frustrations we have had as a community is the accountability and transparency, or lack thereof, in investigations when something does go wrong with an interaction with the police. Now, Justice Tall's report was completed and provided to the Ontario, government from this March of 2017, and to date nothing has been done in terms of implementing that. So maybe this question goes just beyond a little bit from the chief to the politicians who are online, and the question has to do with what specifically are local politicians doing regarding pushing the province towards implementing the recommendation from Justice Tall's independent police oversight review.
Chief of Crombie, do you want me to take a crack at that too?
Yes, it's Nish, and Your Worship, I think that would be an appropriate comment if you're able to.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. And Len, thank you for the question. And of course, Mayor Brown and I have been advocating for reforms, particularly SIU reform as outlined in the recommendations made by Michael Tulloch. We speak about it publicly quite often, and quite coincidentally, we've just penned an op-ed to be sending out on the topic of reform, including the Tulloch recommendation. So hopefully that will meet the Premier's ears. I won't say that we've sent a letter yet, but I think the board is discussing sending a letter as well, advocating for change and for reform. So from our point of view, we are moving on it, maybe not as quickly as you'd like, but we are certainly very aware, acutely aware that report had been tabled and not acted on at the legislature, which is very unfortunate, and I really hope it's not because it was deemed to be partisan in any way, that it was ordered by one government and now it's in the hands of a different party and a different government. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mayor Crombie. And thank you for the question. For our next question, we will go with Cassandra. Cassandra, go ahead. Your line's open.
Hi, my name is Cassandra, and this past week has been a little bit troubling just because I do have an elderly grandmother who happens to be schizophrenic. So this was very troubling for me. And I guess what I'm asking is, what is the Region of Peel doing right now to ensure that that violence is the last resort when dealing with people with mental illnesses? Because my fear is that during this pandemic, more people, especially those that already have mental illnesses, are going to be going through more episodes than before. And I just want to know, what is the police force doing to make sure that they're equipped to handle these situations with without using any type of weapons? Because to me it seems kind of counteractive to enter a situation where you know someone is mentally ill with weapons. So I just wanted to know what the police is doing right now to handle this current situation given the pandemic and everything.
Thank you, Cassandra. I'll ask Deputy Milinovic to address your question.
Yeah, again, great question. And first, the response becomes about really de-escalation and considering how we are approaching those types of scenarios. We've spoken a little bit about having the mobile crisis rapid response team, incredibly important piece of our response model. In addition to that, though, we have other officers and other mental health care professionals who help us support people who are struggling, particularly during this time. Things like our crisis outreach and support team, who do follow-up calls and are available really to help support what should be priority populations in the community, and certainly some, particularly under a pandemic, that are probably more vulnerable and susceptible to some of the things that, some of the issues that they're experiencing prior to going into it. So, we do engage with other human service providers in order to make sure that we insulate as best we can our community members who are dealing with those types of issues.
Thank you, Deputy, for your answer there, and thank you, Cassandra, for your question. Our next question will come from Mohammed. Mohammed, go ahead. Your line is open.
Hello. First of all, I wanted to thank you guys for allowing the community to speak to you directly. It's honestly a privilege. My question was regarding the issue with Ijaz Chowdhury and him not speaking English. My understanding is that that was something that was known to the officers who attended when they during the issue when they were at the residence here. And what I wanted to know was how Peel Police is addressing something like that. If we obviously have a lot of resources being put forward when it comes to mental health. How do we deal with people who don't speak the language, which I also came from an immigrant family. Initially, I feel like that's a pretty common issue. Is there something that Peel Police is going to be putting forward where if there is known residents that they don't speak English, an officer who speaks that language is also being dispatched, is it possible that they're on call-outs, something like that, that also addresses the need of communicating with people who don't have English as their first language to actually address their issues and avoid any sort of confrontations. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Chief Duraiappah.
Thank you, Mohammed, for the question. And so, this is an important one, I think, for everybody to be aware of. I acknowledge the complexities that come with diversity here in our region. And I have to first say that we are probably the most diverse police agency in Canada. We've made significant efforts to make sure we hire. Is it exactly matching the percentage and profile of our community? No, but that's more to do with being able to, recruit and have more people interested in applying. But when somebody does call us for help, whether it be emergency or non-emergency, right from the phone call, the interaction point, we have the ability to make sure we have appropriate language services, even just to receive the information in the call. If we can do that, we have access to it. But the reality is we don't just, and if you have, you worked in the settlement service or settlement agency, you will know the nuances between interpretation and translation. And there are significantly different, just because, somebody happens to speak the language doesn't always mean that they're properly providing the services that we can interface with. So we have established system of cultural interpreters that are available to us. That's not just a translation service that can help community navigate with us. We have access to our settlement services and a variety of other different professions to do that. I would love to have the ability to dispatch an officer, male, female, of the respective cultural language needs. As you can imagine, it's practically and physically impossible to staff that model. So we're reliant on other communication or connection activities. And where we have the ability to plan for it, for example, a lot of things sometimes we need to speak to people, but we'll book an appointment. We will make every effort to do that. Another thing that we do have is a connection to Victim Services Appeal. They are another agency that has access to a variety of different resources that allow for translation, interpretation, support, especially if you're a newcomer and you're not able to navigate the system. They will ensure that they come alongside individuals, ensure that they have a connection to services. So it's probably the most vibrant ability to connect to services here in Peel Region. It's not one that people see, and to be honest, it doesn't need to have to be a uniform officer. You've heard me earlier say that this is a really community solution. It's finding those that are the appropriate agency to come alongside and to be available when we need it the most. And so hopefully that gives you some context to the vibrancy that we have to deal with things, and so we should. We have a lot of ethno-cultural specific issues. We know that there's barriers to reporting crimes, whether it be intimate partner or domestic violence, mental health, access to services. We have really oriented our ability, and so we should, because we should be the leaders in this country in that. And although it's not perfect and we continue to evolve, that is one of our goals, is to make sure we really bolster that process. So again, thank you for that question. Akil?
Thank you so much. Our next question will come from Victoria. Victoria, go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, my name is Victoria, and I was just wondering, would Peel Regional Police consider updating their de-escalation and mental health training for first responders? And my second part to that question would be, does Peel Regional Police see dispatching mental health professionals in the future to better handle situations with individuals who suffer from mental health? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Deputy Andrews?
Thank you very much for the question, Victoria. It's a very good question. We are always looking to update our processes. The dispatch process is one of continuous improvement. We are making changes on an ongoing basis to ensure that we train not only our communicators and our officers, but all of our staff to deal with mental health crisis. As part of that, we have undertaken to build out with our partners, CMHA, the mental health crisis rapid response teams, which you heard the Chief speak about a little earlier. In terms of, we stood that process up in January to help us respond to mental health crisis in a much better, more informed, more disciplined way. The MCERT teams are not the panacea, not the end of the process. We have an ongoing partnership with CMHA and other service providers, mental health professional service providers in our community, to continue to build our capacity to deal with mental health crisis. In the long run, we cannot criminalize mental health crisis. When we criminalize mental health crisis, we eventually are going to end up with tragedy, which we've unfortunately seen a number of times in the past few months. We want to get to a place, as the Chief said, where we put ourselves out of work in this particular area, where mental health crisis is responded to by the appropriate service provider, and down what we should be aiming for is where we avoid having members of our community in mental health crisis, period. If we can avoid getting into that crisis mode through risk mitigation, prevention, and social development, we'll be at the road where we won't have to respond to mental health crisis. We won't be at the door of those suffering from mental health crisis and having to respond when they're actually in crisis, because we've done the necessary work upstream to prevent crisis occurring at all.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you for your question. At this point, we're going to get to our last poll question. And just before that, many of you may have noticed that we are over the 8 o'clock hour. We are going to go until 8:15, so just another couple more questions if we can, as well as this poll. So our poll question is, nationally, the average number of officers per 100,000 residents is 185. Here in Peel Region, that number is 142 per 100,000 residents. Would you like to see this number in Peel increase, decrease, or stay the same? Push 1 for increase, 2 for decrease, and 3 for stay the same. Our next question comes from Perpetua. Perpetua, go ahead, your line's open.
Hello, very good evening to everybody. I'm so happy that we have this platform today. I'm from a member of a black community. I live in Mississauga and I live in Brampton. I work in child welfare. I'm a social worker. And I hear you, the Chief and everybody on the table there, that, we want to do this, we want to do this, but there's one thing that I'm not hearing. This is the acknowledgement of the harm done by the police officers to black communities. and to racialized community. I think if we are to heal as a community or as a nation, there is supposed to be some acknowledgement, some truth and reconciliation with the black people. Because I don't think, even after hearing this, for me to sit down with my boys and say, hey, guess what? You know, I was in this town hall meeting, and this is what the police are saying, this is what my mayors are saying. You're going to be treated the same as a white counterpart. I don't think that's real. It's just, that's in a different bubble altogether. I struggle each day. I'm a social worker, but every week I have to sit down with my son and talk to him about his own safety, that police, right? And now, when you look at the events in the U.S., it's like, what language? Be polite. How? This guy was killed saying, sir, until he died. And so I would like to see us moving forward in a way that really, really is meaningful. Let's have a sit down with the black community and the police and all the racialized communities in Peel to say, this is where we were, acknowledgement of that. And then we can chart the way forward together. This is a process, it's not an event, but I think that we are doing that in child welfare. In child welfare now, there has been a truth reconciliation with the First Nations of this country. It's working. We are trying to reduce the number of children, First Nation children in care and the black kids in care. We are doing that. The steps that have been put forward that we are working on, and it's working. I'm engaging with families differently than what has been done in the last 20, 50 years. And so I would like to see something practical being done where we sit in a reconciliation process and then hear from us, the black people, the people that have suffered so much, the people that don't have confidence in the police, in the people that are supposed to protect us. I don't have confidence in them. Because now I worry if I see even a neighbor doing something, if I call the police, they're going to come, they're going to be shot. Yes, I just want justice.
Thank you so much for your question. Chief Duraiappah?
Yeah. Papatua, I think, first things first, your contribution is the reason why we're having this call. And thank you for relaying your experiences and, from the heart. In fact, what's heavy on your heart as it pertains to speaking to you and your children. We understand that. So I think, let me reiterate again, right at the start of this phone call, I'm not sure if you're able to get the whole time, but it creates another opportunity for me to say it again, is that, we acknowledge anti-black racism exists in all sorts of systems, inclusive of policing, and anti-indigenous, anti-immigrant, and, back to the original statement, as the chief and our organization, we are committed to stop racial bias and those impacts on people. And you're right, people need to stop saying we want to change or going to change. So again, you created a space for me to reinforce the why we're doing this. We're about to make some significant change, and to your point is, what is that? What's the meaningful piece? So first things first is, yes, listening. We need to do some positive, space for people to give us their input as to where we're falling short and what we need to do. But, there's also a place in that, as you spoke to on the reconciliation one, which is similar to the Indigenous community, is we do need to recognize experiences that people have felt not only locally but historically for hundreds of years, the Afro-Canadian, the Black community, and their lack of faith in systems, inclusive of institutions, and we represent one. So, that is 100% loud and clear to us. I think what you need to know is we are, and I as a chief, are committed to really making meaningful change. And one of them is a real effort to bolster a human rights-centric approach, which begins with the acknowledgement I made, but that is going to be looking at a variety of institutional changes within the service to make sure that everything we do, every member has accountability and also is invested in. We just can't, set rules and parameters and not get people there. And part of my role is to make sure we equip our individuals, we have a workplace and a space that meets the needs and understands the lived experience of people in our community. And then finally, I also want to say that we're going to establish an anti-racism and anti-black racism working group, which includes some members of our existing Black Advisory Committee. That concept is going to evolve. We are going to expand that with existing stakeholders, inclusive of our faith leaders in the Black community. You know, we've had that as presented to us, and everybody has a space to get us better. But just, you know, if we have a few seconds left, Akil, I'm just looking at, you know, one of our great emergent leaders in this organization is Sergeant Ferris Ishmael, who, you know, may be known to many, maybe known to some of you, who's really been at the heart and focus of the engagement piece alongside a really remarkable team. We've got this room full of them here, and not all of them could speak to you about their experiences, but they can, you know, attest to where we've been, what we're doing, and where we envision going. And Nish, do you mind a few seconds?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chief. Papatua, thank you so much for your comments. Of course, I echo everything the Chief said. The acknowledgement is first and foremost on our behalf. Just please know, I mean, in addition to working with the community, the establishment of several advisory committees, you know, made up of leaders, faith-based, ethno-cultural backgrounds, we are committed to making sure that everything that we do going forward is informed. It's informed through the lens of those who live in our community. It's informed through the lens who've experienced, you know, the difficulties of having to deal with some of these discriminatory issues. You know, insofar as reassurance with respect to what we're doing in order to make sure that our community knows that we're there for them. I'd like to mention our reassurance protocol within the context of hate crimes. We are the only service in the country that has a protocol in place where anybody who's a victim of hate, bias, prejudice in any which way will get a follow-up phone call from our area to check on their well-being, to connect them with social services, to just make sure that we mitigate those broader kind of residual ripple effects of hate and the fear that it creates amongst our community. And one of the last things I want to say is this. At the end of the day, we feel it. We are a diverse group of police officers. At the end of the day, we take that uniform off and we go home to our families and our loved ones. We come from all different backgrounds and adhere to different faiths and have, you know, various skin tones and come from different walks of life, and we feel it. So much of what you're feeling too resonates with us, and I think it's important for you to know that, you know, we need you just as much as you need us. And we have to continue to work together, and that is why we are so appreciative of you making this call and being as honest and frank as you have been with us, so thank you.
Thank you, Sarge. And that brings us towards the close of our event here. Again, this has been a successful event, and just before I turn it over to the Chief for our closing remarks, I just want to give you the poll results. The question was, nationally, the average number of officers per 100,000 is 185 officers. In Peel, that number is 142 per 100,000. Would you like to see this number in Peel increase, decrease, or stay the same? 58% of you said increase, 18% said decrease, and 24% said stay the same. Chief, I'll turn it over to you for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Akil. And, you know, on behalf of our mayors who participated, our board chair, Ron Chada, our regional team from the region of Halton who are deeply invested, region of Peel, who are deeply invested in improving the efforts that we're doing at a collaborative standpoint. We are deeply committed to improving our service delivery as we move forward. I understand that despite all the ideas and initiatives that we have to commit to, we don't assume, you know, policing is not proprietary. We know that it's not ours to lead on our own. We have to do it with an informed and sensitive manner that takes in the feedback of our public. We know we didn't get to everybody today. We're thankful for the feedback. It is not the end of our consultation process. We've got many other venues and abilities to do this. But we want to just thank the entire region of Peel. On behalf of myself and this entire organization, we are committed to making sure that we remain the safest municipality that we possibly can be in this province, in this country. We also intend on providing the best services that are within our parameters that we can deliver to the community, but we also intend on making sure that those come alongside of us to achieve that. Thank you, Akil.
Thank you so much, Chief, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us. If we did not get to your question this evening, I encourage you to please email us at communityfeedback@peelpolice.ca. We will read all of them, and unfortunately, just due to the sheer number of emails we've already started to get, unfortunately, we will not be able to respond to all of them, but we do certainly value your feedback. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Take care.